Thank you for joining us for this special series of This is Getting Old, sponsored by the 2020 George Washington University's University Seminar Series. Towards Age Friendly is brought to you by Melissa B., Ph.D., in collaboration with GW Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities. Welcome to This is Getting Old. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and today I'm joined by Dr. Wendy Miller. And Wendy is the author of a book called Sky Above Clouds. And this book is about finding your way through creativity, aging, and illness. And you and I met a couple of years ago when I became director for the Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities at George Washington University, because your late husband, Dr. Gene Cohen, founded the center. So it's been, a great pleasure to meet you and to continue to get to know you. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Melissa. It's exciting.
So maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work and how you got interested in creativity and aging.
Well, you can't live and be married to Gene Cohen without getting involved in creativity and aging. And I am an artist and also a practicing art therapist. So I have been looking at the relationships among creativity, arts, and health really my whole life. It seems like my whole life. So, it was kind of a natural meeting for us. And then I continued the writing and his work after he passed away, because I think a really important piece of creativity, particularly as we get older, is legacy work and, what we do with the memories and the archives of people we love. And so Sky Above Clouds was something that Gene and I had worked on together for 5 years before he passed away. And then, needless to say, it took me a number of years to be able to pull it out and get back to it. But I felt a really strong responsibility because it had a lot of his unpublished work, and it also had, work of the two of us together, really looking at creativity and health and aging. So
for people that are maybe not as familiar with this term, and I can tell you, in our first couple of meetings, I was like, trying to wrap my head around this term creative aging. So tell me what that term means, or tell our audience what it means.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Melissa, because I think that, first of all, just using the word creativity, it stirs up everything. It just stirs up everything, like, or are you good at art? Does creativity mean that you're an artist? When does creative aging start? And how do we come to understand creativity? I think I've told you when I went around with the book, that question or that concept was always in the audience, always, where someone would say, well, you're creative because you're an artist, but what about me? So I think, the first thing about it that's really important for us to know is that, unfortunately, our understanding of creativity with aging has been limited. And as a result of the heavy legacy, really, of negative myths and stereotypes about aging, all of which have been denied or trivialized our creative capacity and the accomplishments that we have in the second half of our life. So one of the things that Gene is very well known for in terms of forging this field of creative aging is that in 2001, he wrote the book, The Creative Age, Awakening Human Potential in the Second Half of Life. And it was really the first book to articulate this new paradigm about looking not just at the problems of aging, but at the potential, and that what has been universally denied is really that potential. And he was looking at this emerging field of creative aging. And so his book documents discoveries in neuroscience that radically challenge these conventional assumptions about aging. And, aging is really the best example of how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. He had this little equation that he loved called C equals ME squared. And it meant creativity. Well, really, it meant I mean, say it, C equals me squared. So it's like our creativity is me to a higher level, you know, an individual to a higher level. And but what it meant was M was mass of knowledge, and E was like your experience, and it was squared because it's your inner world experience and your outer world experience. But what he's really talking about in terms of, you know, um, the field and that equation is that there's an inner push. There are built-in developmental drives that push us toward creative expression, and they push us toward psychological growth in the, you know, throughout our life cycle. I mean, Jean was a geriatric psychiatrist. I'm an art therapist. You're a nurse. I mean, we're all looking at what is health and how do we manifest it. So from his book, he was at the center, and the National Endowment for the Arts partnered with the Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities to encourage Jean, and he did do this, to do a national study. And the study was called The Impact of Professionally Conducted Cultural Programs on the Physical Health, Mental Health, and Social Functioning of Older Adults. We just call it the Creativity and Aging Study. But that's really, you know, what it was. Because basically, I mean, Jean's seminal research, you know, it doesn't just respond to aging, it's trying to shape aging. It's trying to look at how we shape this. So this study that he did, you know, which many people know about, many people don't, I don't know, but I mean, they're looking at measuring the impact of bringing artists in, or what were called community-based cultural programs, and looking at how that affected older people, 65 and older, and they actually went up to 102 years old. And the truth is, there were no previous studies of this nature that actually used an experimental design and a control group, and you know, so that you could look at the positive differences. We knew that. I mean, if you ask me as an art therapist, I'm like, of course. But to actually scientifically validate that, having an intervention group where they were involved in these, you know, intensive participatory art groups, compared to a control group where they just were involved in their regular cultural program. So the results of the study totally, you know, just pivoted the field, because what happened was the discovery that when people challenge their mind, when they have a sense of mastery and control, and when their social engagement is increased, they not only do better, they feel better, but millions of other things happen. They don't go to the doctor for their glasses as often. They don't fall as often. Their sense of balance is improved. So there were all of these results finally scientifically validated, that, you know, Jean used to say, if this were a pharmaceutical study, you know, we would have Medicare be paying for it already. But in that it was the arts, you know, we have to climb that hill all the time as well. So, you know, these qualities that I'm talking about, I hope I've gone on about your question, but I think it, you know, it really talks about what is it in us. And that's what I mean about how he shaped aging. What is it that's in us, in our brain, in the neuroscience, in the maturing, that is not just what we can do in spite of our age, but what we can do because of it. And creative aging is really articulating and looking at the fact that this is developmentally programmed in us. And that field used to be really closed off to the arts and humanities. And if you think about it, it's really ridiculous, because how are we going to study aging if we don't integrate the arts and humanities to be able to tell the story of the human story? And to be able to do that, we need to, I would say, you know, don't let the darkness extinguish the light, or don't let the frailty only be what we look at, also look at our strengths. So it's a long way around of giving you at least a little sense of the field.
Okay. And so, and I've heard you speak before, and you've described, aging and how the arts and art making are kind of like this chocolate for the brain. So tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Well, I wish that you had known him, Melissa, because one of the things that he was really good at, and I really look to this, I think Dr. Fauci is really good at this too. It's taking, and not all scientists are, he was really a researcher, and he looked at the neuroscience, and he was looking at all of these different things, but rather than try to complicate it for people, he would just continually he was like a cook. He would just boil it down, keep reducing it until its essence came out. And he went around the country and did a lot of national talks with judges and, all kinds of different people trying to really change the perspective or the image of aging. So in that, he noticed that when he really expressed to people what it is that happens as we age, the brain savors that. And at some point he had a picture of a brain and he had a picture of a chocolate cake, and he went, the arts are like chocolate to the brain. And people, the light bulb went off in all kinds of different people where they understood the research. And the research of the arts are like chocolate to the brain is really looking at, well, they call it the Herald model, and it means hemispheric asymmetry reduction in older adults. So this is what I mean. Most people, they're like, oh, the Herald model, But what it boils down to is that as we get older, we use both sides of our brain, not in a compensatory way, but in a synthetic way. And the fact that we do that, and the fact that, first of all, I had to fight against all the people who were saying, well, of course, because when you get older, you need two sides of the brain. You need two eyes, you need two ears, older people need that. It was like, no, that isn't what's going on. What's going on is that there's a developmental process and it evolves. And as we use both sides of the brain, all these different things happen. And the changes are because we're getting older. And it does different things to us, like the brain is continually sculpting itself. This creativity persists. So the whole idea of the arts are like chocolate to the brain is really saying the aging brain isn't running out of gas. It's moving into all-wheel drive. That's what he called using both sides of the brain, that it's moving into all-wheel drive. And it's really this form of what he called postformal thinking. Well, that's a Piaget term. It comes with aging, and it transforms our life into experience. It transforms our life experience into what we commonly call wisdom. So when he would use that image of the cake and the brain, he basically would say, what is it that you do that is like chocolate to the brain for you? Because creativity is built into the human species. And, Gardner and Rollo May and, people who study creativity, they talk about it as defining bringing something new into existence. And what Gene did is he added bringing something new in existence that is valued. So the question became, what is it that has value for you? What is it that your brain savors? And, so then you really had an answer to these sort of gotcha people who would say, yeah, but you're an artist, because the arts are not just, the art modalities or the music modalities. They can be autobiography, they can be singing and dancing and cooking and gardening and, giving back to the community and volunteering. There's a million ways in which this concept of what savors, what is it that you love to do? And what is it that has value for you? And that is chocolate to the brain.
Well, it also broadens the term. I think a lot of people think of creativity as it has to be like with drawing or painting or music. And so what you've just described, it expands creativity, because even for myself, like coming up with a new lecture or, coming up with a different way to teach somebody something. I mean, those are all things that I do. That's part of my creativity, even at my age.
Exactly.
The other thing I like about the chocolate to the brain is that chocolate is sugar. And when people eat sugar, it fires your brain up. And so when you're being creative, you are using your brain and both sides of it. And, it's kind of the use it or lose it theory. So the more you
Exactly.
use it, so there's protective effects for cognition to protect against, Alzheimer's disease. I think, some of the things you mentioned, some of the other outcomes that were unanticipated from some of his early work around, people not falling as much, balance and, strength. That's because you had to leave your house to go somewhere,
Absolutely.
and so
Absolutely.
that involved movement, and that involved, social engagement. And so in the middle of COVID, that makes it a little bit more difficult, but there's still ways to be physically active and engage in creativity. So.
But you're really hitting on exactly what it is, Melissa. People would say things like learning how to sing in a chorale. It would force me to not pay attention to anything else. That state of reverie, where your mind is 100% focused. I mean, there's endless amounts of research about how good that is for your immune system, how it moves you to the theta brainwave state, all of that. Whereas people can get really caught on like art rather than all the things that you're talking about. The other thing is that, it really, it's not, creative aging is not just about surviving, it's about growing meaning, in the face of diversity. And as you said, COVID is a really good example of that. I mean, we are up against, an enormous piece of adversity. And what do we do? Not only to survive it, but to be able to actually grow meaning in the face of that. And I think we don't necessarily talk a lot about how creativity, it optimizes problem solving. It affects interpersonal connections. It our legacy building connections, that kind of stuff. So that kind of leads us into our strengths.
Exactly. So I was going to say, you also talk about the 4 S's in age-friendly creative aging. And I think a lot of what you've already said, in my mind, easily fits into the kind of all the age-friendly initiatives. So let's talk about the 4 S's and why are they important?
Right. And also just that whole concept of the initiatives, that's really important. Like, how do we help people really understand these various things? So again, Gene used to call them the 4 S's. And, remember, he came out of a geriatric psychiatry background. So, psychiatrists are looking at signs and symptoms. What are the signs? What are the symptoms? Did you sleep? Did you not? Are you this? Are you that? And, he had deep respect for that. And we need to have deep respect for that, whether we're talking about the individual or we're talking about, creativity. You just did it. What are the signs that I am creative, that come up against this question of, gee, it's not the arts, but how do I feel when I'm putting together a new podcast or putting together a new thing? You're savoring, you're giving chocolate to the brain. But what Gene was really concerned about is that, to be able to transform this image of aging, wasn't just transform it. He was a researcher, and he was like, this is not the right image of aging. He had done, a 22-year longitudinal study in HUD programs and created the Creativity Discovery Corps. He realized that there were all of these older people who were living in this, Regency house. And when you went in, there were enormous paintings and enormous embroideries and enormous cookbook, all kinds of creativity. And so he began to say, if we only look at 2 S's, what are the signs and the symptoms, we're not looking at the strengths and the satisfactions. And if we do that, then of course we're not looking at the potential. We're like a car that is, out of alignment and just keeps veering over to the left and isn't looking at the signs and symptoms. And so one of the things that I was thinking about today was how, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter? Well, we know because of what he found out about the brain that, of course, it matters what you value and what satisfies you. But the point is that creativity persists. And the brain is continually resculpting itself, and we mature. Our brain circuitry actually balances and gets better as we get older. And so why does it matter in aging? It matters because creativity encourages these evolving strengths. They don't just happen on their own. We think about things like in relationships, we have new starts, and we make corrections because we get older and we see certain things that worked or didn't work, and we make corrections in them. It matters in aging in terms of how we respond to adversity, because the truth is problems are catalysts for potential. And again, COVID's a great example of that. Like, who would think that we could do everything that we need to do, this way? And yet it's a problem, but it catalyzes us to get creative and figure out how to go about this. I mean, I remember when Zoom, when COVID first started, and all of a sudden you saw sort of, music teachers in class suddenly having each kid do something and putting them together. And you're just like, whoa, it's a visual collage, it's just really exciting. And then there's also intergenerational and community interactions. And I think that creativity is really an opportunity for all of us to do good, to extend it to something. So I think in finale of the strength discussion, what I've been thinking about is that one of the things that's so exciting about your program is that it focuses on the humanities. And the humanities, I think, really are a case. Jean always made this case, and I believe you do too. It's a case for qualitative medicine. And that means reviving things like the narrative through case histories and writing and descriptions and keen observation and listening and empathy and imagination. And why do we look at those strengths and satisfactions? Because they're in service of the dignity of the human story. And that's really the essence of creative aging.
And knowing those stories makes you a better provider, a better friend, better family member. And, so I have a lot of ideas of, even just from listening to you talk, I was like, it'd be really interesting to think about people creating like family cookbooks, and kind of compiling all of the family recipes together into a cookbook, and thinking about your legacy, like going through all of the old photos. My family and I did this, I think in May of this year, just went up to the attic and got out this huge box of photos that are just in this box. And I'm like, why are these not like in albums?
Exactly.
But, even digitizing that. And I do think the intergenerational piece of, when you tell your story, you tell, how you overcame hardship, how you developed resilience, how you had endurance, to keep going. So there's a lot of positive to even just talking about, and I still have 3 living grandparents, and I knew all 4 of my great grandparents. Right. So they certainly have shaped me and helped me along the way too. So
this commitment to creative aging is also really a commitment to follow the real data in aging. And the real data in aging is not, there's no denying the problems. There's no denying there are certain types of things that are declining, certain types of difficulties for sure. But what has been universally denied is this potential. And so, one of the reasons that for me, it was so important to publish Sky Above Clouds was to really be able to say, look, this is the right image for aging. We love Georgia O'Keeffe. And as you know, she didn't like to travel when she got older. And eventually she got an aerial perspective, and she did a number of absolutely enormous paintings called Blue Sky Above Clouds. And Jean started to really talk about that. And so I wanted to just end by one of my favorite lines in the book, and it is this: what we can know is that clear sky above, a something else, awaits us, an inner capacity for change and adaptation that is incontrovertible as nature itself. That something else, the creative faculty, is what draws us to life, calls forth our love, our resilience, our strength, and our capacity to choose not only life itself, but to choose what enlivens us. Sky Above Clouds opens us not only to potential, but to the essential.
Well, very well said. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story and Jean's work and your work. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, and enjoy the whole age-friendly event.
I will. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this special series of This is Getting Old, sponsored by the 2020 George Washington University's University Seminar Series. Towards Age Friendly is brought to you by Melissa B., Ph.D., in collaboration with GW Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities.
Thank you for joining me today for This is Getting Old. If you'd like to know more, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or a related topic you'd like to hear from me about, just let me know. Thanks.